Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, zu einer weiteren Folge von Im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter hier auf unserem YouTube-Kanal Gegenpol. Mein Name ist Monique Stegemann und in dieser Woche geht es um folgende Themen. Warum gerät Syrien zunehmend in den Blickwinkel der Spannungen zwischen den USA und Russland? Welche Auswirkungen hätte eine engere militärische Zusammenarbeit zwischen Russland und dem Iran auf die US-Strategie in der Region? Und warum ist die Lieferung von F-16-Kampfjets an die Ukraine gut für Europa, wie es etwa Außenministerin Baerbock behauptet? Je mehr sich ein Scheitern der ukrainischen Gegenoffensive abzeichnet und damit auch das Scheitern der westlichen Politik, desto größer werden die Spannungen zwischen den USA und Russland in Syrien. Berichten zufolge erfassen zunehmend mehr US-Piloten russische Kampfjets mit ihrem Zielerfassungsradar. Was bezwecken die USA mit dieser Strategie? Wie groß ist das Risiko bei solchen Machtspielen, dass es zu einem ungewollten Zwischenfall kommt? Und welche Reaktion müsste man erwarten, wenn beispielsweise ein US-Kampfjet infolge von solchen Provokationen abgeschossen wird?
Well, first of all, I think we need to emphasize the fact that the Russian Air Force operates in Syria at the invitation of the Syrian government. And therefore, it's a lawful presence. So the United States Air Force is violating sovereign Syrian airspace, and their presence is in violation of international law. So we're not dealing with two equal forces in terms of legitimacy of operations. The United States is in a very difficult situation in Syria. It's a deteriorating situation. And they are struggling to sustain support both in Syria, in the region, and at home for their operations. Russia continues to be an important part of the Syrian government's coalition, a coalition that was formed to defeat U.S.-backed forces that were seeking to remove the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, from power. And Russia is, part of the coalition that continues to support Assad. Let's just be frank. The Syrian government doesn't want Americans on their soil at all. And so the Syrian government is going to use whatever means necessary, short of open conflict, to put pressure on the United States to leave Syria. And so what we see is, there's Newton has a third law: for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. That applies to just about everything. If you push, you get pushed back. And so what we have right now is jostling taking place between Syria and the United States, between Russia and the United States, about America's continued unlawful presence in Syria. It's a dangerous situation because, as you pointed out, it could lead to misunderstandings. We had a situation recently where Russian fighter jets, responding to what they deemed to be a very aggressive flight profile by an American MQ-9 Reaper drone, dropped flares in front of the drone to get it to alter its course of action. Had the drone been damaged or downed, American fighter jets may have intervened, prompting either the destruction of Russian fighters or prompting Russian surface-to-air missile defense systems to respond, or a Russian shooting down an American. No matter who goes down, it's going to be a bad situation, and one that could very rapidly escalate in a very dangerous way. So what I think we're seeing, though, is that there's the beginning of the end of the American presence in Syria. It's an unsustainable posture, and I think the United States, is also confronting a loss of support in neighboring Iraq. And I think people need to understand that the Syrian presence cannot be maintained without Iraq, that the American troops in Syria are supported out of northern Iraq, out of the Kurdish city of Erbil. And if the American presence in northern Iraq becomes unsustainable, so too does the American presence in Syria. So I think we're going to see over time America gradually withdrawing from Syria. They aren't going to do so precipitously at this stage, because to do so would be to abandon its allies, in particular the Syrian Democratic Forces or the Kurdish entities operating in northern Syria. But while the risk of unintended consequence is high, I think the Russians and the Syrians understand the trajectory that they're on, and that's a trajectory that will lead to the eviction of the United States from Syria. And so I don't think any party is going to be pushing for the kind of confrontation you discussed. I don't think anybody's gunning to see an American airplane shot down.
Nachdem der vom Westen und einigen arabischen Ländern verfolgte Regime-Change in Syrien gescheitert ist, Scott, verschwand das Land von der medialen Bildfläche. Seit kurzem finden sich allerdings auch in deutschen Medien wieder Berichte, die beispielsweise über russische Luftangriffe schreiben, aber die israelischen Luftangriffe auf Syrien verschweigen. Woher kommt dieses plötzliche Interesse für Syrien deiner Meinung nach? Welche geostrategischen Ziele werden dort verfolgt?
I don't think we can de-link Syria from Iran in this situation. Iran was a major player in Syria for some time now. Iran has used Syria as a transit area to send weapons to Lebanon in support of Hezbollah, which is a close Iranian regional ally. And of course, Israel has been opposed to this, and Israel has used military force in the past to disrupt or interdict these Iranian shipments. And so much of the military clashes that you see in Syria involving Israeli aircraft are Israeli aircraft targeting Iranian positions or units or organizations, locations that are affiliated with the transfer of technology and weaponry from Iran to Hezbollah through Syria. Why is it getting attention now? It's been there the whole time. It's not as though the Israelis stopped bombing Syria. They've been bombing Syria nonstop for many years. I think what we're seeing right now, though, is an uptick in Russian aviation. The Russians have become increasingly frustrated with the Turks. Russia has been trying to work with President Erdogan to resolve the problem created by the 2016 Turkish invasion of Syria, where Turkey has put tens of thousands of its soldiers on Syrian soil and create a buffer designed to protect Turkey from these anti-Turkish Kurds that operate in northeastern Syria. Plus, the Turks were part of the effort to overthrow Bashar al-Assad, and they provided meaningful support to a variety of anti-regime forces that were trained, organized, equipped, advised by the Turks. These forces operated in the Aleppo and Idlib provinces of Syria, and as the Russians and the Syrians began to roll back the anti-Assad forces from 2015 onwards, many of the Islamic terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, that were operating in southern Syria, in Dara, outside of Damascus, were defeated and given the option of dying or getting on buses and being driven to Idlib, where they continue to operate with Turkish protection. Russia and Syria have been trying to get the Turks to talk about how to peacefully reintegrate these territories, but the Turks don't know how to do this because they have basically created a Frankenstein-Monster in terms of this amalgam of Islamic terrorism, and they don't want them to operate on Turkish soil, and the world doesn't want them to operate abroad, so they're stuck there. Turkey can't solve the problem. Syria's not going to wait forever, so Russia's begun the process of attacking these Al-Qaeda affiliated organizations. And so I think what we're seeing is the world putting an emphasis on the Russian actions in an effort to de-emphasize why Russia is bombing. Nobody wants to talk about the uncomfortable reality that Turkey, a NATO ally, is providing safe haven in Turkish-controlled Syria to the very forces that attacked the United States on 9/11.
Der Iran gehört nebst Russland zu den wichtigsten Unterstützern des syrischen Präsidenten Bashar al-Assad. Nun hat eine iranische Armeedelegation unter der Führung von Brigadegeneral Haidari Moskau besucht, um über militärische Kooperation zu sprechen. Der russische Armeegeneral Oleg Saljukow bezeichnete den Iran als strategischen Partner. Welche Auswirkungen hätte eine engere Kooperation zwischen Russland und Iran auf die US-Politik im Mittleren Osten, aber auch möglicherweise darüber hinaus wie in der Ukraine?
Let's start with the Middle East first of all. I mean, if you pull back and look at a map of Russia and then plot American military bases that exist outside of the territory of the United States, you'll see that Russia is virtually encircled with American military installations. Many of these bases are in the Middle East, and the purpose of these bases is to maintain a permanent American presence in the Middle East, the goal of which is to help strangle Russia. And so it's in Russia's interest to see these bases eliminated and to see the nations where these bases are begin to operate outside of the framework of control of the United States. And so this is what we see. And Iran is an important player in this. You know, Iran has a difficult history with Russia. The history of Russia and Persia is one of neocolonialism, where Russia sought to assert its dominance over Persia, even into the communist times. Russia occupied Iran during the Second World War and tried to convert regions of Iran into communist republics that they were hoping would break free of Iran and join the Soviet Union. The Communist Party in Iran was persecuted violently, and many Iranian communists lost their lives. And that wasn't too long ago, by the way. So there's some tension there. So it's not a natural relationship between the Russians and the Iranians, but it's a relationship that's grown out of necessity, given the fact that the United States was using the same tactics against Iran that it's using against Russia today, to strangle them with sanctions, to bleed them to death with proxy conflicts, etc. And it's when Iran has its historically strong economic ties with the West, blocked by sanctions, the Iranian nation is not going to just wither and die. They will pivot to the direction they need to pivot to survive. That direction is east, and much of what they're doing goes through Russia. They need Russia's support in the Security Council when it comes to their nuclear program, and they need Russian and Chinese support in terms of rebuilding economic ties with Central Asia, with Eurasia, et cetera, that are absolutely required for Iran to continue to survive as an economically viable entity. So you're seeing the economic relations improve, and with that comes political relations, good diplomacy. People are talking. A lot of people don't realize the very close collaboration that took place between the Iranians and the Russians in order to get Russia to intervene in Syria in 2015. Qasem Soleimani flew to Moscow and met with the Russian authorities in 2015 to coordinate with them on how to bring Russia in. And so there is close ties.
Sprechen wir über die Ukraine. Jetzt kam die Zusage der US-Regierung, dass die Niederlande und Dänemark bis zu 61 F-16-Kampfjets an Kiew liefern können. Allerdings geht selbst der ukrainische Luftwaffensprecher Juri Inat davon aus, dass ukrainische Piloten erst im nächsten Jahr die Kampfjets bedienen können. Warum hat Biden so lange mit der Genehmigung gezögert? Und welchen Einfluss werden die F-16 auf den Kriegsverlauf in der Ukraine haben können? Präsident Wladimir Zelensky zeigte sich ja im dänischen Parlament siegessicher.
Well, there's a couple questions that are packed into that question. A couple, I guess, could break them down into different, issue streams, so to speak. First and foremost, Biden has always rightly recognized that, the provision of certain technologies creates a political problem for the Russians, and can be seen as the providing nation becoming a party to the conflict, especially if the weapons that are provided have a meaningful impact on the battlefield and bring harm to Russia. Fortunately for the West, Vladimir Putin is a very mature leader, one that's not prone to responding irrationally to provocations. And Russia has, through great difficulty, failed to overreact to a string of U.S. and European escalatory moves in Ukraine. And the provision of F-16 fighters is just the latest of these escalation moves. The United States has to ensure from its own political position that it's not acting unilaterally, that we also want to shield ourselves. It's sort of the actions of a cowardly nation. I've always condemned my country for its willingness to have others do its dirty work. We talk about wanting to support the Ukrainians, but we're not willing to give them our F-16s. We're not willing to put our troops on the line. We're not willing to sacrifice our blood, but we're willing to have others provide the equipment to the Ukrainians who will die by proxy for our cause. And the F-16 situation is just that. We needed other nations to provide the F-16s and other nations to become willing to do this. Ukraine has been asking for F-16s for some time now. Why is it now that they're getting it? And one needs to look at the expiration of the operational viability of the weapons that are being provided. Let's take the Dutch, for instance. There's talk of some 42 odd F-16s coming from the Netherlands, 24 that are considered operational, and then I think 18 that are planes that can't fly anymore. Why can't they fly anymore? Because they've outlived their operational utility. Airplanes don't live forever. The F-16 was designed as a lightweight air superiority fighter. When you design an aircraft, that means that you're looking at the tension, the torque, the G-force that's going to be placed on it. You're looking at the weight of the airframe, how the weight of the weapons it carries react to the airframe as it turns, as it's subjected to stresses, landings, etc. But after the F-16 was designed, it got turned into a multi-role fighter, which means now it's going to not just be an air supremacy fighter, it's going to be doing air-to-ground bombing. So now you're strapping on more weapons than the plane was designed to take. And that puts additional stress on the aircraft. So what you were seeing is early on in the F-16's lifespan, hairline fractures were developing in the airplane that, if left untreated and subjected to continued stress, would cause a failure of the airplane. That's a sort of a slick way of saying the airplane's going to fly apart while it's in the air, and that's always a bad thing for the pilot and for everybody involved. So the Dutch underwent what they call a midlife upgrade. I think MLU is what it is, midlife upgrade for the airframe. The idea was to go in and repair these hairline fractures and to do an overall evaluation of the airframe so they could fly an additional, I think they were looking for 5,000 hours of flight for these planes that were upgraded. That upgrade was done in the late 1990s, early 2000s. It's now 2023. I think people can understand that 5,000 hour life extension has expired. The Dutch weren't going to give up the airplanes until that expired. Why? Because everybody's sitting here thinking that this is being done to help the Ukrainians. That's just the wrongest thing in the world. It's not going to function properly. And then we put on what you talked about, the whole pilot issue. What do the Ukrainians want to use this airplane for? They say that they need it to clear the skies of Ukraine from Russian aircraft, from Russian cruise missiles, from Russian drones. That's an air-to-air role. Understand that to train an air-to-air pilot takes well over a year just to get through the basics. And then you've got to teach them how to work as a team. The F-16 is designed as part of a NATO and American way of warfare, which means when the plane takes off, it's immediately put in contact with what we call the AWACS. You Germans know what that is. That's that big American airplane with the big round disc on top. It flies out of Ramstein a lot. You've seen it. It's up in the air, the E-3 AWACS. And it's a controller. It's going to be looking for hostile targets, looking for threats, and then communicating with that F-16, vectoring the F-16 to do its job. You take the AWACS out of the position, the F-16 pilot's on his own. And they don't know how to operate on their own like that. The F-16 has a radar that reaches out, let's say about 100 kilometers to detect something. Now, if you have the AWACS can reach out even further and give a heads up and say, hey, the Russians are about 300 kilometers away, and on vector 240, head there and maneuver in a position. They'll try and jam the Russians so that they can come in range of the F-16's radar so it can fire the AMRAAM missile, that's American missile, and it can go off and shoot down the Russian airplane. But you take the AWACS out of the equation, and the F-16 doesn't know where the Russians are. The Russians know where the F-16 is because their radar has a longer range than the F-16 radar. Their radar is their aircraft are locked into a regional air defense network, which is detecting the Ukrainians taking off the moment they take off. The Russians are vectored in. They have longer range missiles. They will shoot down the Ukrainian F-16s before the Ukrainian F-16s know what hit them. Every single time. They will stand no chance. That's just in the air-to-air role. Let's say we want to train them to be that air-to-ground one. You know, that one that puts all the weight on the airplane. It makes it difficult to fly and the airline fractures. So if the pilots survive their movement to contact, if the plane doesn't fall apart around them, how do they operate? Do they have the tactics? Do they know how to operate in a heavy air defense environment with the F-16 airframe? The answer is no. That's a whole different kind of training. That's in addition to the air-to-air training. Which pilot do you want? The air-to-air fighter who's going to get shot down as soon as he takes off, or the air-to-ground pilot who's going to crash before he gets to the target, shot down? Either way, they're getting shot down. So in reality, you don't need to train them at all except how to take off and maybe use the ejection seat. But we're not even going to give them that training. And then that environment for both those requires you to suppress Russian air defense. That's suppression of enemy air defense. That's a whole different flight profile, training profile that the Ukrainian pilots aren't going to get. The Ukrainian pilots get a very rudimentary package, 6 months in nature, that's going to teach them how to take the airplane off, how to land the airplane. Are they going to put the different loads on the aircraft so the pilot learns how to handle the aircraft under different situations? I doubt it. Are they going to teach them the, high maneuverable, tactics used for air-to-air combat, or how to respond if an enemy surface-to-air missile locks onto you, split-S maneuver, et cetera? That puts a lot of stress on an airplane that can't take the stress, by the way, because it's old. Remember, it's the clunker. It's like trying to take the clunker to the Nuremberg Ring. You know, that big old racetrack that all the Germans go in and put money down so they could take their car and drive like they're race car drivers? Now you're going to take that clunker on this, and this is going to break apart, look foolish. That's what the Ukrainians are going to look at with the F-16. This is a political move, a purely political move with zero military potential. This will have no meaningful impact on the battlefield at all. There's a good chance this war may not be fought by the time the first, they need to be going by the time the first F-16 show up. But if they do show up, they will die quickly.
Bundesaußenministerin Annalena Baerbock bezeichnete die Entscheidung über die Lieferung der F-16 aber trotzdem als einen guten Tag für die Ukraine und einen guten Tag für Europa. Ob es ein guter Tag für die Ukraine ist, das wird sich erst noch zeigen müssen. Aber, und das fragen sich auch unsere Zuschauer, warum soll es ein guter Tag für Europa sein? Inwiefern trägt diese Entscheidung zur Sicherheit Europas bei?
My mama raised me right. so I cannot speak ill of women. And I know it's a very sexist thing to say because in this day and age of equality, stupid women should be treated as stupid men are, with no respect. But I'm not going to treat Ms. Baerbock with disrespect. I'm just going to say that she's wrong on this issue. But she's fundamentally wrong on this issue. How is this a good day for Europe? Let's just backtrack this for a moment. She is, after all, the German foreign minister, so I would hope that she understands a thing or two about the economy. I understand she's from the Green Party, and they claim to be a economically focused party. They care about, the environment and transition to a green economy and things of that nature. So I think she understands the concept of economic growth, and I would hope she knows right now that the German economy is shrinking. It's not growing. I would imagine that the German voter is probably letting her know what they think about high prices and, especially with the winter coming and the concerns about the availability of gas. Does she not understand that all of the economic problems that Germany faces today is because of the position she and others have taken regarding the war in Ukraine, the willingness to sanction Russia on this? One would hope that you would recognize that. And therefore, if you know the cause-effect relationship between the war and your economy is such that the war has caused your economy to collapse, trying to continue that conflict, especially in a futile effort that is not going to result in a Ukrainian victory, but just more dead Ukrainians, the inevitability of a Russian victory, you're extending this conflict at a time when it needs to be terminated now so that Germany has a chance this winter. But instead, she wants to extend it, which means that Germany is going to continue to feel the repercussions of its political decisions from an economic standpoint, and the German people are going to continue to suffer. One would hope that she understands that. Germany is humiliated today, as is the rest of Europe. There was, going into this conflict, NATO operated under the premise that it had technological superiority over the Russians, those silly Russians, those inept Russians, those primitive Russians. We have great technology. We have the Leopard tank. Well, how's the Leopard tank fared out, Ms. Baerbock? The Ukrainian soldiers that operate them suffering horrific deaths or injuries. Again, I hope she's proud of this. Is this a good thing for Germany? That Germany is responsible for the deaths of so many Ukrainian men? Again, I just ask her to go and memorize the names of the Ukrainian soldiers that were trained by Germany and then find out the names of their wives and the names of their children and go talk to them as the wife struggles to exist, to raise children in a home that no longer has a father, in a nation that's being destroyed around them. Is this a good thing for Germany? Is this the kind of thing that Germany wants? I know that Germany is, after all, the repository of the remains of Stepan Bandera. And I know that Germany has a history of supporting the Banderists. We can speak of the Gehlen organization, and which, General Gehlen is, of course, a Nazi general who otherwise should have been tried for war crimes and executed for what he did in the East. But instead, because of the network of Ukrainian agents that he controlled and the willingness of those Ukrainians to sacrifice themselves in the cause of Nazi Germany and then in the cause of the West to kill Soviets, there was this relationship between the United States, Germany, Gehlen, the Banderists. So I know that history is there, and I'm not sure if Baerbock knows that history, but she has to understand that she's behaving in a way that mimics that. I thought Germany was going to walk away from its Nazi past, but instead, no, Ms. Baerbock, Scholz, and the others continue to operate as if they are the direct descendants of the Nazis in terms of the relationship Banderas and Ukraine against Russia. Is this what she means by good for Europe? This is a good thing for Europe to revive its Nazi past? I just think she's a confused woman. I think she's operating outside of her depth. And if it weren't for the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men who have died, for the millions of Ukrainian civilians who have suffered, I'd probably be willing just to pat her on the back and say, poor lady. But I'm not. She's a criminal. She's a war criminal.
Dankeschön, Scott, für deine Zeit und deine Analysen. Wir freuen uns auf nächste Woche.
Okay, thanks.
Dankeschön. Meine lieben Zuschauer, auch an euch, herzlichen Dank fürs Zusehen. Wenn euch das Video gefallen hat, teilt das bitte breit in den sozialen Medien, abonniert eben noch unseren Kanal Gegenpol und vor allem, wenn ihr selbst Fragen habt, die wir unbedingt mal stellen sollen, dann schreibt sie uns in die Kommentare. Bis dahin, eure Monique.